Right? Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in amma ba'd. Today, inshallah, we're going to talk about the boycott that occurred during the time of the Prophet alayhi salatu wa salam. And this is towards the second half, or in the middle of the second half of the Meccan period. So you're looking around nine years after the Prophet alayhi salatu wa salam began his da'wah. And the context of this boycott is as follows. Quraysh saw that this man, Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, is preaching a new message, but he kept it to himself and a small group of people. And so they left him alone. They knew this was going on, but it was private, whatever. They do it behind closed doors, it doesn't affect us. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam to publicly announce the religion and to call people to Islam and to warn them that rejecting the faith results in punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at this point, Quraysh begins to harass the companions. The weaker they are in the tribes, the more they harass them. The stronger of a tribe the person comes from, they couldn't do much because their tribe protects them. And this is a very important point for today's discussion. The system, the social system that was in order in the time of the Prophet ﷺ was a tribal system. What does that mean? That means anybody who's of your tribe, you are responsible for protecting them and defending them no matter what. They're right, they're wrong, doesn't matter. They're one of yours. That means you are sworn to protect that individual. And this mindset remains in the Arab world today. We know this. Tribalism, the tribes, they still do this, a little bit softer than before, but this is the mentality. And this is why the tribe of the Prophet, ﷺ, Banu Abd Manaf, they protected the Prophet. His uncle Abu Talib, his cousins, his relatives, they never touched the Prophet. And whenever Quraysh would come to them, they would go to Abu Talib, who was the leader of Quraysh. They'd say, stop your son. Stop doing, tell him to stop. They would go to him. Why? Because he's the leader of that tribe. Harming the Prophet means going to war with Banu Hashim and Banu Abdul Muttalib and Banu Abd Shams and Banu Manaf, right? It's going to war with these tribes. And these were powerful tribes, so they couldn't touch the Prophet ﷺ. But they abused and they harassed the other companions. Their goal was what? To stop them from their da'wah, to dissuade them. That didn't work. So what did they go to? Negotiations. And I mentioned this last time. Okay, Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, we'll worship your God for a year, you worship our God for a year. No, okay, we worship our God for a day, our gods for a day, we'll worship your God the rest of the year. No. Negotiations. Waddu law tudhinu fayudhinun. They wish for you to negotiate, and then you could compromise. And we see this going on in our time today with the LGBT movement, the Democrats, whatever it is. There's always an amount of testing the Muslim to see whether they'll negotiate or not. That didn't work. What do? They go to sanctions. You see the same strategies used in our times today. Russia's misbehaving, China's misbehaving according to the West. What do? Sanctions. They try to negotiate. They try to harass them a little bit through propaganda. None of that works. Sanctions, right? Now they go to sanction the Muslims. Not just the Muslims, Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib specifically. They boycott the entire tribes. Muslim, non-Muslim, doesn't matter. You're protecting the Prophet. That means you're all in the same boat. And what does it mean to boycott them? It means Quraysh was banned. Anybody who lives in Mecca, it was against the law, so to speak, to buy from these tribes, to trade with these tribes, to marry from these tribes, or to marry to these tribes. Right? All of that is banned. Now, when Quraysh does this, Abu Jahl is the one who leads this effort. And he puts together a sahifa, he puts together a treatise, that is meant to speak on behalf of all of Quraysh, and we're going to ban these tribes. They write it down and they put it on the Kaaba. And from there, the boycott begins. And the scholars differ over how long the boycott was. Some say 3 years, some say 2 years, some say a year and a half, 18 months, around that time. Whatever it is, the boycott begins. When Quraysh does this, those who are being boycotted, they leave. They go to a different place in the outskirts of Mecca. Why did they do this? And this is an important point that we're witnessing happening in our times today. Something similar is happening in our times today. The whole idea of tribalism is that you protect your own. You protect your own at whatever cost. Agree with them, disagree with them, like them, don't like them, it doesn't matter. You never betray your own. And the reason why this was so rooted in Bedouin societies is because it was part of survival. The resources are scarce, so they have to stick together. And so in tribal systems, the sheikh of the qabila, the leader of the qabila, the leader of the tribe, is not based on blood. It's not the son of the previous sheikh. Rather, they would choose the individual from the tribe who is best capable of protecting the tribe. And that's why characteristics like karam, generosity, forbearance, al-hilm, sidq, honesty, became so prominent in the Arab tribes, because these were qualities and characteristics necessary for the sheikh to protect the entire tribe, right? So you have that going on. And you also have, before the da'wah, you have what's called hilf al-fudul, the treatise of al-fudul. And this treatise essentially was agreed on by the Arab tribes that, or at least Quraysh, that anybody who enters Mecca, it is incumbent, it is mandatory on everybody in Mecca to protect that person and to be just towards them. If that person is dealt unjustly, then Quraysh as a whole must protect that person's rights and must restore their rights. This is rooted in the society. Today, in the Western world, they always go around boasting about what? We are the people of human rights. We are the people who have freedom of religion. We are the ones who have freedom of trade. We are the ones who, we're the most civilized people, and all these things that you've been hearing since you were a child. The West boasts about this. We're the only civil people, and everybody else needs to follow us, or they're not civil. France took it, even the West took it upon themselves to, through the UN, state the Charter of Universal Human Rights. And the Western world took it upon themselves to determine what is the rights of all human beings forever. We look at the level of arrogance. But they took it upon themselves. And we see this, we see what's going on. But in light of the conflict in Palestine, as we all know, what did it expose? The double standards. You don't believe in this stuff. You boast about human rights. You don't believe in human rights. It's nothing more than a political tool in your hands to make yourself seem better than everybody else, to dictate and to dominate the ideological realm and the political realms. Vivek Ramaswamy, whatever his name is, he did an interview with the British guy, what's his name? Piers Morgan. And they bring about like the UN, what the UN is doing in light of the conflict in Palestine. And Vivek, he himself said, it looks like the time of the UN is running out. And I'm sitting there listening and I laugh because I know exactly what he meant. The UN was created to serve the West, primarily the US. It's no longer playing that function the way it was created to play it. So he's saying, we no longer need it. So the world is looking at what's going on in Palestine. And now, in light of all this, everybody looks at the West as no different than Russia, no different than China, no different than any other country. You're no different. All of it is talk, lip service, that's it. When push comes to shove, you are equally, if not more, inhumane and neglectful of human rights than Russia and China combined, right? And this makes people really mad. It's really frustrating for the average American. Well, what are you doing? We really believe in this human rights stuff, and you're behaving completely contrary to it. The contradiction. Going back to the boycotts, Abu Talib took his tribe and he left to the outskirts of Mecca. Why? Because the same thing happened. There's a tribal system. You can't, like, how do you do this to your own tribe, your own people? It goes against everything we stand for. What kind of double standards is this? You don't trade with us, you're going to starve us to death. What happened to the tribal system? You see how similar it is? And so in this light, you have a very difficult scenario come about for the believers. They were so hungry, like the people of Gaza, they were eating leaves because they had no money. They were starving. No buying from them, no trading from them, no giving them humanitarian aid. Exactly what's going on in Palestine. And so in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, he was sieged twice. Once in this boycott, the other time in the Ahzab, the Battle of the Trenches, twice. And from here, I draw our attention to Surah An-Naml. Now, what's very interesting is that I don't know of verses that talk about the boycott. Even though as an event, that's pretty big. It's a pretty big event, very serious. But I don't know of verses that directly talk about the boycott, which is very strange to me, very interesting. You'd think at such a critical time, they would need revelation, they would need wahy, it would be addressed, Allah would criticize them for them, Allah will warn them. Hey, you're doing this, I'm gonna punish you for what you're doing to my servants. Of course, all of that is true. But some scholars attribute at least part of Surah An-Naml to this incident. Because, as I'll get to later, when the boycott was broken, it wasn't lifted, it was broken, right? The Prophet ﷺ told his uncle that ants ate the paper that the treatise was written on, the boycott was written on. And it said that Surah An-Naml, at least the beginning, comes in this regard. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after talking about, after praising the Quran, He says, Hudan wa bushra lil mu'minin. Guidance and glad tidings for the believer. Now, again, I'm not sure if this really is talking about the boycott, but we're going to discuss these verses in light of the boycott. This event is a source of guidance, huda, and glad tidings for the believers. How is this event guidance for the believers? How is what's going on in Palestine guidance for the believers? Not for everybody, for the believers specifically. Well, as I was mentioning before, these events expose the reality. The Muslim world, for the past century, has been enthralled, so fantasized, like they're so fascinated by the West. The West has all these ideas. They're technologically more advanced. They're more civil. MashaAllah, look how they deal with each other. They have so much akhlaq. How many times did we hear that the kafir has more akhlaq than the Muslim? And maybe sometimes that is true. But we keep hearing this over and over and over again. Muslims for the past century has been looking to the West as though they are superior, whether they say it directly or not. That's how they've been looking at them. And the fact of the matter is, so long as Muslims see others as superior to what Allah has given them, how are they going to benefit from the Quran? Rather, what's going to end up happening is they will understand the Quran in light of the ideologies of the West. The ideologies of the people they think are superior. And that limits the huda, that limits the guidance. But when events like this happen, it's all happening in the Muslim world. We're seeing all the comments and all the videos. How many times have we heard this? Everything the West is saying is all lip service. It's not real. It's not, they don't believe in it. And now the whole empire of the West, the fantasy of the West in the minds of the Muslim world, the Muslim person, has collapsed. And what will it be replaced with? And wallahi, our religion is the true religion. Because of the behaviors of the people of Gaza, of the people of Palestine. So stuff like this is hidayah. It is guidance. As painful as it is, it serves as guidance. How many people became Muslim as a result of this? How many? unbelievable amounts. And so it is guidance, hidayah, for the believer. So many Muslims had trouble understanding why Allah created hellfire. I mean, Allah is going to throw people in hellfire to be tormented for eternity. And they look at Netanyahu and his people and say, well, they deserve it. Now I understand why Allah created hellfire. Hidayah for people. When they see, just today I saw a video of some aid entered from Egypt. And on one of the containers, somebody from Egypt wrote, Inna nasrullahi qareeb. Ala inna nasrullahi qareeb. Indeed, Allah's help is near. He wrote it. Min ikhwanikum min Masr. From your brothers and sisters from Egypt. And so somebody in Rafah made a video and released it. Maybe you saw this. Al Jazeera posted it. And he said, you all, talking to the Egyptians, you might think that this is small, but to us it means the world. Right? It means the world. So when you see stuff like this, what does it do to a person's iman? What does it do to their akhlaq? When somebody is smiling in Rafah, right, of all places, the worst place a person can be today, and he's smiling and giving a shout out to his brothers and sisters across the border with a smile on his face. Wallah, I couldn't believe it. I thought this guy maybe is making up this video somewhere else, relaxing. He looked good. He looked okay. Of course, he's not. Hidayah is guidance. Wa bushra. It is glad tidings. Bishara. How so? Well, number one, if Allah loves somebody, He tests them. Why? Because the test means Allah cares about you. Think about school, for example. They test the students. Why? To check their progress. Where do they need help? It's a type of way of telling the students, or it's a system that says, hey, we actually care about your growth. And so we're testing you. If a teacher doesn't care, they wouldn't care to test. They wouldn't care to examine the student and their skills. So when Allah tests somebody, essentially, Allah is telling them, I care about you enough to interject in your affairs. And I will structure the test in a way that is in your best interest, despite how painful it might be. So it's glad tidings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, very difficult scenario. But it's showing what? Something will come about. The fact that all the time people are hearing and saying, Ala inna nasrallahi qareeb, that's not random in Allah's system of qada and qadar. It's not random. Right? So there's a bishara there. Also, there's a bishara in a sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He wants to punish a people, when He wants to destroy them, He causes them to do the actions that will get His punishment. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِيَقْطَعَ طَرَفًا مِنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَوْ يَكْبِتَهُمْ فَيَنْقَلِبُوا خَائِبِينَ. Allah causes these things. Allah let Quraysh do what they do to create a case against them so that He punishes them. And when He does punish them, He does it with full justice. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is preparing Netanyahu for where he belongs. في الدرك الأسفل من النار. In the lowest part of hellfire, just like Fir'aun and Hitler. Which is very ironic, by the way. The very two people who tormented the children of Israel the most, this man who claims to be part of God's chosen people will end up right next to them, doing the same exact actions. Ya subhanallah. Right? So it's poetic justice in the minds of the believer. And he's one of the longest, if not the longest, politician in Israel's history. And he boasts about it. All this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a bishara that something will happen, right? And it will result in a way that will cause Quraysh, cause Israel to be humiliated in front of the world. Right? So it's a bishara للمؤمنين الذين يقيمون الصلاة ويؤتون الزكاة وهم بالآخرة هم يوقنون. They establish their salah, they give their zakah, and most, at least in this context, extremely importantly, they believe in the afterlife. The people of Palestine cannot have done what they have done in the past 75 years if they do not believe in the akhirah. Period. Period. I mean, the world looks at Palestine. Just leave your land. Why die for it? It's just a piece of land. You could find your way somewhere else. That's what most people would do. They would just run. But they're inspired by a cause. And they said, if this cause takes my life, then I will return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with honor and dignity. They cannot do what they do without belief in the akhirah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, talking to the believers in the time of the boycott, is telling them your akhirah and your belief in the akhirah is what will cause you to succeed. And we Muslims, we really need to realize this sooner than later. Because if and when a test comes, if your connection with the akhirah isn't strong, then your ability to navigate that ibtila, that test, is going to suffer drastically, tremendously. We were created for the akhirah. We were created for the afterlife, right? And therefore, we need to build our strength in that regard. Believing that all that I do in my efforts, all that I succumb to, all the pain that I take, all the mocking and the ridicule and portraying us as terrorists and evil people, trying to make us look like the worst of the worst, all of that, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger tell us, is ajr. It's ajr in the afterlife. It's reward in the afterlife. Now, going back to the bishara, I forgot to mention this point. Going back to the bishara, one individual put it brilliantly, very beautifully. You're gonna need batteries soon. He put it very brilliantly. When asked the question, how do we know, Allah is going to help the people of Palestine? He said the first sign is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cut them off from the rest of the world. The first sign that Allah is going to help them is that He cut them off from the rest of the world. Nobody can help them. As much as we try, we cannot do anything. SubhanAllah. How is that a bishara? And the answer is, because they've been cut off from everybody else, who do they have other than Allah? Who do they have other than Allah? So if when Allah wants to give somebody strength, He removes from his life everybody else but him. أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ وَيَجْعَلُكُمْ خُلَفَاءَ الْأَرْضِ. This is in Surah An-Naml as well. A very powerful verse. Who is the one who answers your dua when you have nowhere else to go? And He removes the harm. Not only that, after removing the harm, وَيَجْعَلُكُمْ خُلَفَاءَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. He makes you the successors on this land. Isn't that exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the children of Israel? Huh? That He is going to make you the leaders after what Fir'aun did? So you see, all the variables are coming together. Wallahu alam, what the near future has. But all the variables are coming together to show that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to change the world order in a way that is in favor of the Muslims, in favor of the believers. We restore some of the normalcy that we have been accustomed to over the past 1400 years of Islamic history. So that is a bishara. It's painful. I don't mean to undermine this. It's painful. But you have to have that insight. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing them the fact that you've been cut off from society tells you that Allah wants to build His relationship with you so that you get your strength and your power from Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that your tawakkul is only in Him, and that is a believer's true strength. Now, going back to the story, this is going on for a year and a half, 2 years, whatever it is. And Quraysh, many members of Quraysh, they were displeased with what's going on. ما كانوا راضين. They weren't accepting what's going on to their fellow tribes people, even though they weren't Muslim. So what would they do? They would secretly put food in the area where the Quraysh or the Bani Hashim and Bani Muttalib were at. They would go at night and send a camel. Believers would be sitting there. All of a sudden, a camel would come in full of supplies and food and everything. Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, she had her business network. She had her network. So she would contact them, help me with this, do me a favor here, and she would pay them, and she used her network. Radiallahu ta'ala anha. Right? So many people of Quraysh, they weren't accepting what's going on because it goes against what they've been born and raised to believe. Like today, many people in the West, most of the people in the West, they're rejecting what's going on. Enough is enough. What is this nonsense that our country is supporting, that the West is supporting? It goes against everything we are. It goes against everything that we stand for, that we fought for. right? That we spent the country's history trying to perfect. And subhanAllah, people tell me, people in activist realm here, our brothers and sisters, they say, they get calls from anonymous people who say, I'm an employee at congressperson's office, they're doing this and that, go and protest over there. They get another call from somebody, anonymous call from somebody who's in a newspaper company, LA Times, or wherever, and say, hey, they're about to release this article, you should write an article like that. People are helping us. It's unbelievable. Just like in the time of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. And then a group of 5 members of Quraysh, among them Mut'im ibn Adi, Zuhair, 3 others. They came together. They said, Ya enough is enough. We can't let our fellow tribes people die. They're about to die. What can we do? They devise a plan. Very, very detailed plan. And so the next day, one of them, the one who's leading the effort, goes out while Abu Jahl is sitting by the Kaaba or outside, he's in the vicinity. He calls out Abu Jahl. He says, Abu Jahl, you forced us to accept these terms. We don't accept it. Abu Jahl responds and says, you lie. You accepted it. The man said, Wallahi, we didn't accept it. And then another person stands up, one of these other 5, says, no, what he's saying is right. We don't accept it. And a third one, a fourth one, a fifth one. And then Mut'im goes, takes a paper and rips it apart. Abu Jahl is looking at this. He said, you all coordinated this. But the tribes have all seen what happened, and they didn't do anything. It seems like they're in agreement. Abu Jahl said, you won this time, pretty much. And the ban was lifted. And then the Muslims go back to their homes, and normalcy ensues. What is the lesson here? The Muslims were not able to do it themselves. They needed non-Muslims to help them out. And so we Muslims, and I think we've come a long way in this regard, and we're accepting of this, but we need to accept the reality. We live in a time where we're not in power. We're not in control. And we need alliances, healthy alliances, of course, without negotiating and compromising our beliefs, but we need healthy alliances to deal with the challenges today. There's no way the Muslims alone will be able to lift the siege in Gaza and Palestine. No way. But we can do it with allies, strategic allies. We can do it with the help of other people who truly believe in this. We would not be where we are today without people like Norman Finkelstein, George Galloway, and others who have been advocating for Palestine for the past 40 years. Right? So in our minds, a smart believer is somebody who accepts the reality for what it is and realizes we're not at a time where we can do everything ourselves. We need the help of non-Muslims. And the Prophet ﷺ said, when Mut'im ibn Adi passed away, right? He said, if Mut'im were to have interceded for Quraysh on their behalf, I would have accepted it. I mean, the Prophet honored this man, Mut'im ibn Adi, even though he died as a non-Muslim. So the boycott was lifted. Now, the last point here in these verses, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ زَيَّنَّا لَهُمْ أَعْمَالَهُمْ فَهُمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. Those who disbelieve in the afterlife, Allah beautifies their plots and their plans to where they become confused. Meaning, Netanyahu sits and looks at what he's doing, and he makes these public announcements and these speeches, we're going to be victorious, and he actually believes it. And Allah makes him believe it so that he falls in his own grave. He falls in the own hole he digs for himself. But the other day, the previous ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Israel, said that Netanyahu cares more about his political life than the interest of Israel. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the ways He punishes the criminals is by beautifying the actions that they do. So they continue to do it, so that they fall in their own grave, the pit, and their own punishment. So in light of the boycott, there are many lessons. It is not the first time, nor will it be the last time where Muslims are sieged and they are boycotted and they're put through extremely difficult scenarios. And therefore, the people of Gaza, the people of Palestine who are starving and going through tremendous difficulty, the Prophet went through that twice. The companions went through that twice. And that is part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's planning for the empowerment of the Prophet and the success of the Prophet and the believers. And we should view it the same way today. It's not a punishment for them, but rather part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hidayah for the believers and His glad tidings for the believers. Another point is that never believe that the elites of society actually believe in what they say. No. The elites, the politicians, they say, we believe in this. No, the only thing they believe in is their own power. And whatever it takes for them to keep their power and to increase their power, they will do. Even if it means going against everything they claim to believe and they preach that they believe. This is the reality. Don't be surprised if you were surprised in these past few months. And then the third point is that believers need to have strategic alliances. It is part of empowering the Muslim community to build relationships at the individual level, at the communal level, at the national level with other individuals. You never know how these people could end up helping. And I'm talking about your co-workers, your business partners, your neighbors. All of these matter because when push comes to shove, we can call upon them to help or at least make them neutral towards the cause. In fact, you should do favors for them so that when the time comes, you can call the favor back. Of course, in a way that's good and doesn't compromise them or cause them to do something, inappropriate. The idea is we need to have strategic relationships. It goes a long way. Like Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha used her business ties and business relationships to bring in some food for the believers, or else they would have starved. Like the other relationships that preceded Islam. They came and they fended for the believers, and a positive result came. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And then Allah concludes by saying, وَإِنَّكَ لَتُلَقَّى الْقُرْآنَ مِنْ لَدُنْ حَكِيمٍ عَلِيمٍ. This Quran is coming to you from the All-Wise and the All-Knowing. Wallahu ya'lam wa antum la ta'lamun. Allah knows why what's happening needs to happen. We might not know it. We might really despise it and not like it. It's painful. But let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's qada and qadar play its role. Our role is to deal with it in a way that's pleasing to Him. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wa jazakumullahu khair.